Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Join us today as we take a trip to sunny Mexico. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another Advanced Studio Classroom. I'm your host today. My name is Simon, and you're joining me for our August Adventure article. Now, this is an adventure article, but in a lot of ways, it's really a travel article because we're talking about a trip to Mexico, actually, an island that belongs to Mexico called Cozumel. Our article today is called Fun on Land and in the Sea in Cozumel. And I guess this is an adventure article because Cozumel is an exciting place, especially if you're into environmental tourism and things like scuba diving. And so today, joining me in the studio, I have two panelists, both of whom have been to Mexico, though maybe not Cozumel, and both of whom are scuba divers. So hopefully, oh, no. One of them isn't a scuba diver. Terrible news. That's okay. We'll still let you stay. Manya, you're the panelist who isn't a scuba diver but has been to Mexico. How are you today?
I'm great, and I went to Mexico by cruise.
Now, I'll be honest, Manya, I came by that mistake honestly because just about everybody who works with us here at Studio Classroom is a scuba diver.
I know, but not me. Not yet.
How did you miss out on this opportunity?
I just did. But it's okay. I'm sure we'll rectify that problem.
Yeah, you just have to stay around a little while longer and we'll make sure you join us on a dive trip and get your license. Our other panelist today is Josh. Welcome back, Josh.
Thank you, Simon. It's good to be here.
Now, both of you have been to Mexico, right? Tell me a little bit about where you have been in Mexico.
I went to Baja California when I was 13, and it was a cruise. So we went along the coast and stopped by many places in Baja California.
Now, just quickly, Baja, which part of Mexico is that? Is that the east side or the west side?
It's the west side.
And it's kind of the peninsula, the long piece of land that's hanging out from the rest of Mexico, right?
Yes. That's
okay.
right.
Now, you said Baja California. Is that the same thing as the state of California in the United States?
It's not, but it is south of the state of California.
Yeah, and a lot of our listeners might not know that at one point, California was actually part of Mexico, right?
That's right.
So there's a very close geographical connection between the two places. Okay, so you had a good trip?
Yes, I want to go back, actually.
Now, it's interesting because that trip you took, it sounds like it involved a lot of beaches.
Yes, it was along the coast, so most of the places we visited were water related.
And that's kind of interesting because our article today really does focus on this idea of Mexico as a resort destination, like a place where you go on holiday. Mexico, of course, though, has a very rich culture and is an important part of the economic system in North America. So there's a lot more to Mexico than just beaches, but today we're mostly going to be talking about those tourist things. And so it's good you have some experience with that, even if you were young at the time. Josh, tell us about your trip.
So my trip was a little bit different. I flew into the center of Mexico, Mexico City, which is a very big city. It's really impressive when you're flying over Mexico City, how long that goes on for. But I met a friend who was staying just south of Mexico City, and then we traveled together through the center of Mexico to its southern coast, and then went along the southern coast until we went into the Yucatan Peninsula and saw some of the Mayan ruins there. And it was both rich in culture and very good food. And when we made it to the southern coast, there were a lot of beautiful beaches.
Now, it sounds like you were on a road trip. Is that right?
Well, we mainly did it by bus, but that's totally right. We got around on the road, and it is very common to travel in the interior of Mexico by bus. And it's actually quite big in Mexico. I think people don't realize how big Mexico really is. So you can go a long distance by bus.
Okay, and you were a little older, I would guess, when you did this trip.
I was a little older. At that time, I think I had been out of college for maybe 2 or 3 years.
Okay, so actually you were older than I was when I visited Mexico. I should tell you, listeners, that Mexico is a very popular destination for college-aged students in North America and older people as well, but particularly because it is inexpensive and a beautiful sort of beach place to go. And so it tends to draw large numbers of students who are kind of taking spring break trips and things like that, as well as older families and things like that. So I went to Mexico several times when I was a student, a university student, and I was very near where you were, very near the Baja Peninsula, just at the top. And we went to the same place several times because we loved it so much. And this sounds, this place we're talking about today, Cozumel, sounds like that sort of place, the place you might want to return to again and again. And it's actually described in the deck today as a laid-back Mexican paradise that will leave you wanting more. And so, of course, when you want more of something, you return again and again. Today, we're going to do 2 readings. Let's do our first reading now. You can find it on page 28 of your magazine. This, of course, is the lesson for August 16th. And we're going to read the left-hand column now together.
Fun on land and in the sea in Cozumel. This laid-back Mexican paradise will leave you wanting more. My first visit to Cozumel came for the express purpose of getting certified as a scuba diver. After an entire week of exploring nothing more exciting than the bottom of the YMCA pool in New Orleans, I was at last getting ready for my checkout dive at Cozumel's beautiful Palancar Reef. Gradually descending to a depth of 75 feet, I would have gasped at the marine life around me if I hadn't had a regulator clamped firmly in my mouth. Aside from multicolored corals, I observed sea life ranging from gorgeous, sunfish, parrotfish, and sea turtles, to gruesome, barracuda, moray eels, and nurse sharks. I got my PADI certification, but sadly never returned to Palancar.
Okay, listeners, so this first reading is full of the language of scuba diving, and that's because Cozumel is an island, and I gather it is well known as a diving destination. It has things like a reef that are mentioned here. So let's get into this a little bit, and I think, Josh, you should start us out. Right at the beginning here, the writer says that they came to Cozumel for the purpose of getting certified as a scuba diver. Now, what does that involve?
So it involves a few different things. Usually people have to do some classroom instruction about the ideas behind scuba diving and what you need to do in order to be safe. There are a lot of things that happen when you go underneath the water that are related to pressure and, of course, the air that you take with you. So you need to understand all of those things before you go in the water. And then you have to do a number of practice dives. Usually that's in a controlled environment, like a swimming pool, before you go to your first open water dive. So that's a dive in a lake or river, or if you're lucky, in a beautiful ocean reef someplace where you can practice all the skills that you've learned about under the instruction of a dive instructor.
Now, there's another term that they use actually right at the end of this reading, and I'm going to suggest we jump ahead just so we're all on the same page and we all know what we're talking about. The term is PADI certification, right? You have PADI certification. I have PADI certification. Poor Manya does not yet, but she might get it. She might get it. What is PADI certification?
So there are a couple of diving associations that are responsible for providing both the coursework material and requirements for getting your dive certification. PADI is one in North America that is the most recognized. So that is the Professional Association of Diving Instructors. They also have a worldwide network. So many places that you go, you will not only find PADI instructors, but you'll also find like PADI certified dive shops. So where they've gone through the certification so you know that you can get your equipment there. that's safe and reliable.
Okay, and so this is kind of a process that's different than most licenses. Like when you're getting a driver's license, it's actually controlled by the government who can get a driver's license. Scuba diving isn't. It's sort of controlled by private organizations of people that are promoting the sport. But it is still an activity that has some risk associated with it, right? And so they have these standardized courses you get to get a license, and then you actually get a card, right? And you mentioned the PADI network, so you can go to different dive shops in different places, and you show your card, and they'll let you rent equipment and let you go on dive tours and things like that. Okay, so our writer here mentions, just like you said, Josh, they spent an entire week exploring nothing more exciting than the bottom of the YMCA pool in New Orleans. So the writer has been in New Orleans in the United States, the city of New Orleans in Louisiana, and they've been taking their diving classes. But an exciting part of this process is that after you do the classes and you show that you understand how to use the equipment in the pool, they let you go out for what's called an open water dive, or several of them, before you finish your course. And so this person has found themselves in Cozumel at the beautiful Palancar Reef. Now, what exactly is a reef?
So a reef could be, usually it's a natural growth of coral that creates sort of a break in the water where outside of the reef is sort of open ocean and inside of the reef is sort of protected waters. But reefs can also be made out of rock. There can be man-made reefs where they take maybe old ships or old storage containers and put it down in the ground. A lot of times you will find reefs that are just filled with marine life because it's a good place for fishes and corals and other marine animals to live.
So the key points there are that it's usually not too deep in the ocean. You can kind of dive down to it. It's kind of shallow water, but it is generally mostly underwater, right? And it's usually out of rock or maybe coral, which is actually a living thing. And basically, because of its position and where it is, it becomes this sort of rich environmental ecosystem with lots of different creatures. And so lots of fish, lots of plants, things like that, lots of interesting things to see. And so reefs are an attractive thing for scuba divers. There's something very interesting to dive at. Monya, our writer goes on to describe their open water dive in Cozumel. What does she tell us about it?
Well, she said that she saw a lot of sea life, a lot of beautiful fish, and some that looked quite gruesome, which means that they're kind of ugly looking, kind of scary.
Yeah, all kinds of things, because, of course, the underwater world is very different than the above water ones. You see all kinds of surprising things, right? Josh?
So I like that she used this description of gorgeous to gruesome, right? So it means sort of this big range of things from very, very, very pretty to kind of maybe ugly or even scary. Although I have to disagree. The things that she lists here, barracuda, moor eels, and nurse sharks, I think are also very beautiful. But I could see where someone who's not used to them might think that they're a little bit scary.
I usually, the term cool kind of comes to mind, like interesting when I see those things, even if they're ugly or, beautiful. I leave that to the person who is looking at them, but they're definitely interesting, very different things to see, right? There's sort of some language she uses before this. She says she would have gasped at the marine life around her. Now, gasping at something, what exactly is that?
It's going...
When you're surprised, you breathe in, right? Your mouth is open. And so basically, she would have been so surprised that she would have done this, but she couldn't. Why couldn't she do this, Josh?
Well, she was using her regulator. So regulator is a part of the scuba equipment. It's the part that regulates the air pressure so that you can breathe the air in the tank. And, of course, you want to keep that firmly in your mouth so that you can breathe normally. And that's why she couldn't gasp, is because she had a regulator fitted inside her mouth.
She didn't want to lose her air.
Exactly.
So she did it. Now, the reason I mention this is because the way she says it is actually pretty interesting. I would have done this thing if I hadn't something else, right?
Yeah.
And so it's sort of saying she wants to emphasize that this is something worth gasping about, but she didn't actually gasp.
I do also want to make a point here that my wife gets very excited anytime she sees something new underwater. She really enjoys scuba diving, and I enjoy going diving with her. And when I'm close, I can hear her making sort of like gasping or crying noises when she's really excited about something. So it's possible to do with a regulator aid in your mouth. You just have to be very comfortable that you're not going to lose the regulator.
Even if you do lose it, it's still attached. You can just grab it, put it back in.
That is actually one of the skills that you are supposed to practice when you get certified, is how to put the regulator back in your mouth just in case you lose it.
Don't panic. That's the number one rule, right? Don't panic.
Yeah, really, and especially anything water-related. Panic is bad, so just don't panic.
There you go. Don't panic. Okay, that brings us to our second reading for today. Listeners, you'll find that in the right-hand column on page 28. Let's do that reading now.
On dry land. Thus, I was thrilled when the chance came to spend a bit more time on the island. This time on the ground instead of under the water. Cozumel is a great place to spend time on land, as 80% of it is federally protected. Swaying palms, sandy beaches, and dense jungle-like thickets make the island seem farther away from the overbuilt tourist destinations of the Yucatan than the 45-minute ferry ride from the mainland. My friend and I booked a driver for a day to take us to two of Cozumel's most interesting spots, Parque Punta Sur and Pueblo del Maíz. Parque Punta Sur is on the undeveloped east side of the island. It is the largest ecological reserve, 247 acres, on the island with a number of different ecosystems, lagoons, forests, and reefs. You can often find yourself the only person on a stretch of beach that meanders for 7 miles. There is Pelicano's Beach Club, where you can stake out a hammock. There is snorkel equipment you can rent to explore the shallow reef, and a lunch buffet to enjoy between dips in turquoise waters.
Okay, so Cozumel is, of course, much more than a reef. It's also dry land, right? Because it's an island. And so there are things to do there besides just diving, and that's what our writer gets into here. So the writer says that she was thrilled when the chance came to spend a bit more time on dry land, basically, on the island. And then she talks about why Cozumel is such a great place to enjoy as an island. Josh, why is that?
Well, so she says here that 80% of it is federally protected, which is really quite amazing because that's a good percentage of an island that obviously attracts a lot of tourism.
Now, when we say federally protected, usually we're referring to the federal government. Mm-hmm. In some countries, people will say the central government, some places, right? Mm-hmm. But federal government is a term that seems to be used more in American English. And so basically the government has either set up like national park or nature preserve or some sort of strict rules on how you can use the land in this area. And so the result of that is that you have this beautiful environment that the writer goes on to explain for us. They say, swaying palms, sandy beaches, and dense jungle-like thickets make the island seem farther away from the overbuilt tourist destinations of the Yucatan. Now, the Yucatan, that's where you went, Josh, right?
Yeah, so it's a very famous peninsula in Mexico that extends out into the east, into the Caribbean. The Yucatan is also very famous for its Mayan ruins, but it also has a number along the coast. It has a number of very famous resort areas. However, if you go inside the peninsula of the Yucatan, it's also very dense jungle.
Okay, so the writer here is describing Yucatan as having overbuilt tourist destinations. What exactly does she mean by that?
So something that is overbuilt means that people have put too many buildings too close together in an area where you're going because the natural beauty of something. So instead of seeing a lot of natural, like beautiful jungle and forest and swaying trees, you see a lot of restaurants and bars and clubs and hotels.
Crowded. People everywhere. Tourists everywhere. So I guess the idea here is that because such a large part of this island is like a federally protected reserve, you feel like you're really far away from civilization, I guess you could say, or developed areas of the country, when in fact you're actually not too far away, right? They say you're only a 45-minute ferry ride from the mainland. Okay, now the writer and the writer's friend did something. They went to two different places that we're going to be discussing over the rest of this article. What are these two places?
So here we have the Parque Puerto Sur and Pueblo de Maíz.
Now, Josh, you sort of speak Spanish, right?
I do speak Spanish.
Okay, Josh, help us out here. What are these places?
So Parque is Spanish for park, and Punta Sur is South Point. And then Pueblo is, so Spanish is a little bit difficult sometimes because the way that the words are used are different in different Spanish-speaking countries. But Pueblo here is going to be the city or the small town, and del maíz is corn. So it would be the corn town or the corn community.
Oh, my goodness.
Wow.
The things you learn when you learn another language, hey?
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? Now, here we find out that the driver is actually going to take a car. They booked a driver with a car to take them around. That's probably because it's a small island and probably because it's a nature reserve, so not too much public transportation. But nonetheless, that is the plan. And so, Josh, you're going to have to help me with my pronunciation here. Where do they go first? The Parque Punta Sur?
Very good.
Oh, thank goodness. Listeners, you will know that I have the worst pronunciation. I just said pronunciation. Worst pronunciation.
In any language, right?
It's not only because I'm from Canada. It's because I slur my words together. Blah, 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 like that. So tell us about the Parque Punta Sur, Manya.
Well, it's the largest ecological reserve on the island with a number of different ecosystems.
Okay. And so they also tell us it's on the east side of the island, and it's the undeveloped east side. Now, that seems like it's connected to overbuilt tourist destinations, right? This term undeveloped. So what are we talking about here?
So undeveloped, it might mean very, very few small buildings, but when we say that something is very developed, then you have a lot of buildings here. So undeveloped means that it might have a little bit of a road. It might have maybe a couple of small houses, but that's about it.
So when they say 80% of the island is federally protected, what they probably mean is that there's a town or a village, and that area is the only area you're really allowed to, develop things, right? And so basically this is the other side of the island, the furthest place you can go from the town, maybe, I guess, is what I would assume here. Oh, okay. And so it is an ecological reserve with a wide variety of different things. Lagoons, forests, and reefs. Now, we've talked about reefs. Listeners will know what forests are. What exactly is a lagoon?
So a lagoon is an area that is usually protected or surrounded by reefs or some other landform so that you have sort of a broad, shallow, usually very calm water that's connected to the ocean.
Yeah, so it's salt water, like it is ocean water, but it's in an area that's kept very calm, so it's not too wavy. It's protected during storms because there's a reef surrounding it and sort of separating the bigger ocean from this area. And so the result is that often you get a lot of interesting things growing in reefs. It's a nice coastal area, so you can have a lot of plants and fish and things like that developing.
It can also be very interesting because it's so protected and you don't get a lot of waves or a lot of current. It's areas where you'll find some sea life that we're reproducing, so that's where they'll have babies or that's where they'll lay their eggs. So it can be very, very interesting areas.
Yeah, and they go on to describe this as kind of a paradise. You can often find yourself the only person on a stretch of beach that meanders for 7 miles. Now, when we say something meanders, Manya, we mean it
wanders aimlessly.
Kind of goes back and forth. And not a straight line is the idea.
Not a straight line. I also have a sense of not with any real destination in mind. So if you're just kind of meandering, you're just sort of kind of going around.
Trying to escape from the stress of the world.
There you go.
On the meandering beach. There you go. Our last paragraph tells us about a club, like a place where even in this undeveloped area, there are some services available. What is this club, Manya?
It's the Pelicanos Beach Club, and you can stake out a hammock.
And now when you stake something out, basically it means you are choosing something, right? You're kind of like when you go into a restaurant, you put your bag down on a chair.
Claim it.
And you're like, this is my chair now. Yeah, you've staked it out. And this term comes from the old days when people were choosing areas of land to settle, and they had a stake with a number on it, a stake being like a wooden stick that they pushed into the ground to claim their part of the area. Right?
And I think a lot of people who travel to beaches are familiar with this, where you see a number of hammocks or tables available, and you go, oh, that hammock's mine. I'm going to use it for the day, and that's where I'm going to relax, and nobody else take my hammock.
You put your towel down, you put your bag down. Yeah, that's exactly it. Now, a hammock it's basically a bed, but it doesn't have any bed frame. It's tied between two trees or two poles, right?
It's a swinging bed.
Yeah, so you're kind of hanging there. You listeners will be familiar with these if you have been to a beach, because they're a very popular way to spend the day. It also says there's snorkel equipment that you can rent. Josh, just tell us very quickly, what's the difference between snorkeling and diving?
When you're diving, you're taking air with you to breathe underwater. And when you're snorkeling, you just have a small tube that you use to breathe normally while your face is in the water.
So diving, you can go deeper underwater. Snorkeling, you have to stay near the surface if you want to breathe.
That's right.
Okay. And they also offer a lunch buffet that you can enjoy between dips in turquoise waters. Turquoise is a very beautiful green-blue color, right? So they're describing kind of a perfect tropical destination here. Listeners, that brings us to the end of today's lesson, but be sure to join us tomorrow because we're going to continue talking about the different things you can do in beautiful Cozumel. Until then, I'm Simon.
This is Josh.
I'm Manya.
Saying bye for now.
Goodbye.